Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. This is going to be a super interesting session. And obviously, thank you so much to Lizzy for giving up your time.
Absolutely.
We're so grateful. The purpose of today's chat is just to give a better steer on how brands and for agency folk, our clients, can understand how to really truly leverage podcasts in their media strategies. So without further ado, we will kick things off. And I think good starting point, Lizzy, is just to understand a bit more about what Acast actually is. I feel like people get confused by that. So tell us.
Yeah. Does anyone here know what Acast? Hands up if you do know what Acast is.
Or think you do, maybe.
Or think you do. Oh, this is great, most people. But maybe I can just give the simple explanation because sometimes people are like, are you an app? No, we're not an app. So essentially, Acast is, this doesn't sound very sexy, but Acast is essentially the world's largest independent podcast company, but we're a marketplace for podcasts at heart. So we work with 140,000 podcasts around the world, right from the biggest, showiest names, whether it's, celebrities like Peter Crouch and Off Menu and Catherine Ryan, and then brands, The Guardian, The Times, Telegraph, all those guys, through to smaller podcasts, and then right through to hobbyists. So if you have a podcast yourself, you can be hosted through us and monetize. And so on the other hand, we have 3,500 advertisers nearly that we work with around the world, and we help them activate across podcast advertising in many different ways, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So it's essentially a double-sided marketplace, but that's really boring. We match creators and brands, and we, drive revenue for podcasters. Was that a good explanation?
Very good. Yeah,
I hope
thank
so.
you.
It's kind of my job,
And what would you say just on a more granular level? So say a podcaster comes to you and says, right, I've got this idea, I want to get it off the ground. What would the steps be to doing that and getting it live?
Yeah, I think one misconception with Acast is we don't actually produce podcasts ourselves. So we come in at the point where you've got a podcast, maybe you've got an idea or you've already produced a podcast, and then you want to get it out in the world, so distribute it via the wonders of RSS technology, where you literally press one button and then it appears on every single app, every single listening platform. And that's the point we'll come in and we'll say, okay, great. And then we'll start talking about, okay, how do we best position you for advertisers? How do we make sure the show is, optimal for receiving advertising and being attractive to advertisers? And then we give you all the sort of support to start growing that revenue. So yeah, we come in at the point when the show is sort of ready to go, really.
Yeah, I think that's really useful to know versus just right at the start. And then obviously I'm sure we've got loads of podcast fans in the room, and you get the pleasure of working on podcasts every day.
Yeah.
But tell us a bit more about your day-to-day role, and obviously you're on the comms team, so what does that entail and what do you do specifically?
Good question. I do things like this. No, I'm kidding. So I'm Chief Communications and Brand Officer. So I basically oversee all external comms, PR, corporate comms for Acast globally, because we are a global business in 16 markets, internal comms as well, and then brand. So brand, everything from our visual identity, our audio identity, how we talk about ourselves, and our messaging. I kind of like to think of myself as like cheerleader for Acast, because I'm obsessed with podcasts, so I love talking about them, yeah.
Yeah, great. That's really helpful. And then just on the subject of just how much podcasts have really grown over, the past 10 years, they had a real moment in COVID when every man and his dog was starting a podcast, and I'm sure you felt the benefit of that.
Mini dog podcasts.
Yes, that too. And they really are a buzzworthy topic. So tell us a bit more about, the reach of podcasts in the UK and globally, and, just how many people are listening to podcasts.
Many people. So, podcasts have grown massively, but we still, at Acast, like to talk about, we're still in sort of the infancy, because as an industry, podcasting is still very young compared to TV, cinema, all those kind of radio as well, obviously. But Acast has been around 11, 12 years now. Podcasting continues to explode. It's funny because when I joined Acast 8 years ago, I remember talking at the time being like, wow, podcasts are really exploding. And now every day it's still like, podcasts are still exploding. Yeah. And you're right, COVID was actually, and it always feels a little bit weird to say this, but COVID was a real boom time for podcasting, because as you say, people started listening to them on their regimented daily, government state-sponsored walks. All these creatives who couldn't go out and do comedy, make films, make TV, pivoted to, well, I've got a microphone. I was just saying, things like Parenting Hell, with Josh Widdicombe and Rob Beckett, was born out of the fact they couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't do anything, so they thought, let's just talk about it. And now look at the hit that is. And then advertisers were spending because there was no point, and they couldn't really spend on out-of-home, cinema, all these other things that relied on people being out in the real world. And so that was a real catalyst as well for the growth. And now, I mean, it depends on which reports you read, but I think in the UK it's around about 50% of the population have listened to a podcast in the last week, and that's grown something like 40% in the last 3 years. So, and the US, I think it's more like 40%, but then obviously they're a much larger population. And what we see at Acast is, established markets continue to grow, and then new markets. For us, places like countries in South America, perhaps in Asia, are just continuing to discover podcasts and really boom themselves as well. So
yeah, definitely not showing any signs of slowing down, which is great.
It was interesting though, isn't it? Because I'm sure you guys either think or have heard this. People say, "Oh, everyone's got a podcast now." Are we at saturation point? But while the audiences continue to grow, there's always going to be room for growth of podcasts. So the more people that are turning to podcasts, I was saying to you that when I first joined Acast, there were members of my family older than me who were literally like, "What's a podcast? Is that like radio on my phone?" And now they're phoning me saying, "Oh my God, I listened to The Rest is Politics this week." So there are particularly older audiences, younger audiences are starting to really discover podcasts in different ways, and that's just a massive boom for everyone.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. And I think, obviously it's great that so many people are listening to podcasts each day. In PR, as you'll know, being ex-agency, we talk a lot about vanity metrics and, reach figures being really important. And often it's biggest number wins. We really want that high, huge population of Europe number to be able to sell back the success of something. But we were speaking earlier about the fact that when it comes to podcasts, actually, you don't really always want to aim for a really high listenership, and it's all about engagement. So tell us a bit more about that and what metrics brands should be looking for if they activate with podcasts.
Yeah, absolutely. So Acast, we do a report every year called the Podcast Pulse, which is a look at the state of the industry, and it's really to empower particularly advertisers to make the right decisions in podcasting. And this year the theme was all about resonance. So what we always talk about is it's not about how many people you reach, it's about how deeply you obviously engage with them. I mean, as marketers, advertisers, you all know that already, but podcasting has that true power. And the data that we find, I'm just going to refer to my handy cue card so I don't get this wrong. We find things like, so this resonance, this is the stat that I really love. So when you think about influencer, the term influencer can have negative connotations now because of the way it's grown over the years. And we talk more about narrative influence in podcasting. But one thing that I love is, so 75% of people that we surveyed, they don't consider podcasters to be influencers. So when you think, oh, influencers, they don't think, oh, that's, podcasters are those people. But then 84% say they've been influenced by something they've heard on a podcast, right? So it's almost like they're being influenced without putting them in that category, which maybe does have negative connotations. Podcasters are truly the new sort of people driving both the cultural and advertising agenda. The other stat I like is that 55% of people trust podcasters more than anything else. And so the only people that our respondents say they trust more is family and friends. Isn't that crazy? So then they put podcasters, then I think it's like journalists, other celebrities and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I'm kind of preaching to the choir because you probably know all this already, but it's good to have the data to back it up, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I also think I am regularly quoting things that I've heard from a podcast. I can get so many insights from them that I don't know if they've fact checked them, but I trust them wholeheartedly. So I just hope they have. But
I think that's interesting though, because more than learning things, it's those parasocial relationships.
Exactly. Yeah.
So okay, this isn't being recorded, right? This is all off mic, so I can tell some stories. Jokes. But working in podcasting, I've met quite a lot of podcasters, obviously, and people that I've listened to for years. And you have that parasocial relationship where you almost know too much because
100%.
I don't know if anyone listens to My Therapist Ghosted Me here,
I do.
right? We all know, watching Vogue in the Jungle right now, we all know the background, the ins and outs, the in-jokes. When Joanne posted the other day, I thought she was just at Purple Dragon Play. Me and all the girls are like, that's hilarious. You might not understand. I don't know why I looked at you.
It's a niche reference.
Just because you're a man. But what I'm saying is I have to be careful when I meet podcasters that I really love because I almost know too much and you don't want to come across as creepy. Yeah. But they also forget that they share so much.
100%. I think with Miss Me, as an example, obviously the incredible success Lily Allen has had with her new album, which obviously is incredible. We all love it. I think the podcast helped because
100%.
she didn't say a thing, but she's so easy to love and she's a great character, and then she comes out with this incredible like era-defining record that, you know, all the fans from the podcast are like, we're tapped in, you know.
But talking about driving like the cultural agenda, I mean, obviously the big example from this year was Taylor and Travis. So Taylor announcing her album on Travis's podcast. But for me now, it's almost like carrying on the theme of like Vogue in the Jungle. I'm like, I cannot wait for her to get out so I can listen on the podcast. Like, it's just that sphere of like new levels of influence. And then bringing it back on message. When brands get involved in that conversation, it's magical.
Yes.
That was a good soundbite, wasn't
great
it?
segue, actually. Because I think, you know, a lot of the brands in this room and also agency folk, like, we tend to say, right, let's activate podcasts. We need to consider podcasts. And I often, you know, honestly think people don't really know what they mean by that. They just say it because they think they should, and they know it's a really rich territory for, you know, engagement. But before we get onto the ways and the methods of doing so, I think it'd be helpful if you could just explain, you know, what podcasts offer that is different to other sources of media. So obviously, you know, print, is it dying? Is it coming back? Who will settle that argument? There's so many traditional forms, but podcast is a bit new, and obviously it's audio based. So tell us a bit more about what you see as the key differences in podcasts.
Yeah, I mean, so we've already talked to death about the, you know, the intimate relationship and how valuable that can be for brands. One thing that I love, and we talk about a lot at Acast now, is we always say podcasts are sought, not served. So the difference there is you are actively seeking out, you're going, right, I want to listen to my therapist go to me. I should say it's not an Acast podcast, so I'm not just plugging our own shows here. But, you know, you actively go out and you want to find that content, you want to engage with it. Whereas obviously when you're sitting in, you know, in bed, scrolling TikTok, scrolling Instagram, you're being bombarded by things that, some things you've chosen, or they're, you know, the algorithm is actually playing to your taste, some things you really don't want to see. And so podcasts have that real sort of like, again, that resonance because people are actively choosing. And then that's really powerful for brands as well, of course. So I think that's one big difference. I mean, the other big differences we've talked about in terms of like, levels of influence. There's also, I think people, maybe I'm wrong, don't realise there's so many different ways that you can access a podcaster's audience, aside just maybe straight like sponsorships, which everyone knows the host reads, you know. But there's so many different ways. I mean, I could go into the minutiae, but maybe you know it already. But it's everything from, you know, your brand ads through to working with them across their socials as well. We talk a lot about omni-channel campaigns. So think of a creator as just sort of like, you want to tap into the creator and their audiences wherever they exist. So yes, the podcast, their social feeds, live events, video too, which is now becoming, you know, such a massive part of podcasting. So there's no one size fits all perfect solution for brands. You've obviously, like all good media planners, you've got to start with who is my audience and how can I best reach them versus let's just slap a load of ads on a load of big podcasts.
Exactly, or start your own, which we'll come on to, whether that's a good idea or a bad idea. But I think, obviously we spoke before about the fact that I'd done, you know, in past client work, some actual branded segments of podcasts, and I didn't even know that was a possible or branded episode. So can you break down the different ways to activate, you know, in a bit of detail? So obviously host reads, branded segments, what that looks like, and just so everybody is
let's start with the most famous. So the host read sponsorship, that is obviously the most famous. We have podcasters who are excellent at across Acast. My favourites are, everyone always says it, but Adam Buxton. Like that guy, he understands the assignment, right? But you know, there's so many different flavours of the host read that can work really well. So that's kind of the bread and butter, along with just straight ads, which is where, you know, the brand just has their own brand made ad run across podcasts. And then branded content is such an interesting area. You know, full series, yes, brands can create their own full podcast, but we wouldn't always necessarily recommend that's the place to start. Shorter form, as you say, branded segments, so where there might be, you might have heard sort of like a 10, 15, or maybe 5, 10, 15 minute segment within a podcast, which is obviously longer than a host read and can be quite creative sometimes. I think of some of the ones we've done with people like, we used to do with Shag Married Annoyed, where they'd go and visit a cafe, part of the lottery scheme. And then full branded episodes can be so effective when you really understand the podcast. So my favourite example and I seem to just be bigging up Adam Buxton right now, but one of my favourites years ago was we did one for the Art Fund, which is the Art Pass, where you go and, you can go and visit those different museums. So he had Tim Key on, one of my favourite comedians, and they just went for a walk around a gallery and did the episode as they walked around the gallery. So it was a very sort of natural fit, and it wasn't in your face, and it worked really well. So so branded content is a big opportunity. And then, as I just touched on before, extending across a podcaster's socials, live events, obviously live podcasts, a bit like the new, I was going to say rock shows, but that makes me sound really old. But live podcasts are insane. Like the events I've been to, Royal Albert Hall, Wembley Arena, and you're just like surrounded by thousands of fans, and it's just, that's also a great place for brands to be as well,
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Question on host reads, because I also am a fan of Adam Buxton, and I never skip the host reads. I always listen to them because they're hilarious.
And I didn't even tell her to say that.
That's true. Like Louis Theroux's, at the end of every podcast, I'm like, he's just a genius. Like the way he's talking about, a website developing platform in a really funny way is just great. How much creative control and I guess like fussiness do you see with the podcast hosts in terms of which brands they'll work with? Do you find that you might take 5 brands to the Adam Buxton podcast and he only says yes to one? Are they really fussy about what they will and won't do?
I mean, it's less about fussy for us. For it to work, and what makes podcast sponsorship so effective is like genuine authenticity. So actually we would never push on a podcaster to promote something that they weren't comfortable with, because it's not going to come out as a good, effective read, right? So in general, as a podcaster, whatever level, you have your block list. You can say, I'm not interested in, certain categories, but they get to approve and they decide on every single campaign that they do. Because also, if they don't feel they can do it justice, then they're not going to just, take the money for it when it's not going to be effective.
And I think that's a big difference with like influencer marketing, whereby influencers, you do see those sort of grip and grin posts. Influencers are not that fussy, and that's where, again, that sort of engagement is heightened as a result of being a bit more decisive about what they will and won't do.
Absolutely.
Okay, and then what about podcast series for brands? So say a brand's like, right, I'm not willing to activate with a podcast that exists. Would you recommend that? Obviously, I think there's a couple of examples where it works really well, like Dish and Waitrose, for example.
Oh yeah, that's a great one.
It's a really good one, and you sort of forget it's made by Waitrose even. I don't know how much messaging Waitrose get in each of the episodes, but I don't know. It feels like that's the default option. So what would you say? What are your views around it? And is it something that you recommend? I
mean, it's got to be right. It's got to be right for the right brand. So we find that, we just launched. So BetterHelp is the biggest spender on podcast. I'm sure you know this. The biggest spender on podcast advertising in the world. And we took them into their first ever branded podcast last year. It was called Mind If We Talk. And that works so well for them, and they've just renewed for a second series. But that's because talking about therapy is so nuanced. What their brand and their product is it deserves and it needs unpacking in longer form. So that worked really well for them. We produce branded series for the likes of Nike, Pfizer, lots of different brands. But it's kind of more on a case-by-case basis on whether that's right, whether it is something that's a bit more complex, whether it is something that invites more discussion versus something that's maybe perhaps a bit more frivolous or people just get in an instant. So we would always say, yes, come and talk to us about doing a full branded series, and we will tell you whether we think that's the right option, or whether you might want to go down more shorter branded content or something else entirely. So it's definitely... Also, the other thing about branded shows is you might not be trying to, like we're talking with Resonance, you might not be trying to reach millions of people. You might actually have a very specific core target audience around, I don't know, let's just say financial services, and actually creating a really tight podcast series which will definitely hit, your 1,000 people, say, in a certain area you want to hit might be the right way. So there's not a one-size-fits-all.
Yes, and I think with that in mind then, would you say, like, when we're ideating for clients or when brands are ideating themselves in the podcast space, would you say, like, before you hang your hat on a series, like, come and talk to us, from that stage, because what will land, and it's very case by case.
And we have a whole creative team, like we have almost like a mini agency, Acast Creative, within Acast, whose job is to do just that, to come and be consultants, talk to you, help you, pitch with you if that works as well, you know? So definitely.
Yeah, no, I remember when I worked with Acast a few years ago, someone on your team was super helpful. It was for Oatly, and we were very fussy about guests, and there was a lot of like back and forth. But
You worked with Reasons to be Cheerful.
Yes.
One of
Who's
my
your friend?
favourites.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Which is still a great podcast.
Yeah.
Okay, and then in terms of investment involved, I think lots of clients might presume that you do need a big budget, but is there ways to do it if you don't have a endless amount of cash to throw on a really expensive guest? Like, say you've got a shoestring and that's what you're working towards, like, how can you still make podcasts work?
Yeah. Well, the good news is it has changed massively in the last few years. So when I first joined Acast, to properly activate a campaign, you did need bigger budgets because it was quite a manual process. It, involved a lot of work on our side as well. And then a few years ago, we launched a platform whereby any advertiser with any budget, as small as like £500, can go in, research what they want to do, build their own campaign and activate their own campaign, which obviously is a very light touch from our side. It's very much more of a tech play. And that's democratized podcast advertising for so many brands that wouldn't have maybe been able to before. And then what we're doing now is it's one thing to have that kind of access, but a lot of brands who are starting out in this space, they don't know where to do, they don't know what to do, they don't know where to start. So we are building all these kind of tools within there. So for example, last year we launched something I love, which is called Smart Recommendations. It's essentially like an AI search tool where you can type in natural language, I want to reach women in London, age 25, who love skiing. Don't know why I said that. I don't like skiing. I'm not 25, clearly. And it will but it will give you a whole media plan of the right kind of podcast to target, to think about, and it will also give you the reasons why. And that's important because in that case, you might naturally go, okay, I need to look for podcasts which talk about sports or winter sports or whatever. But actually, the people who are interested in ski holidays who are 25 and live in London are probably listening to, I don't know, maybe some Catherine Ryan, some Fern Cotton, whatever, and you might not realise that at first, and that kind of insight. And not just those big names, but they're probably listening to smaller niche podcasts you've never even heard of, and they're going to be bang on. So
don't jump to conclusions about what you think might be right.
Exactly. So the short answer is it's much easier now for brands with more modest budgets to access podcasts, advertising, and access those audiences.
Yeah, I guess it comes back to that point about like you reading the brief and saying, right, well, actually you could do a smaller segment for this amount of money and taking it completely bespoke. Obviously, we work in the world of PR where we are aiming to achieve earned versus paid. So a question from me is, we can get in touch with podcast hosts directly via their agents, via their, sort of stock email to use. Is there an opportunity for editorial inclusions in podcast episodes? Because I think I used to listen to Dolly Alderton's podcast, The High Low, and they would always sort of mockingly talk about like PR research stories and stats that were like, oh my God, can you believe this? Did anybody actually say this? Is it fake? And that was always a way I thought you could activate quite cleverly, but broadly speaking, can you get a story in a podcast episode without paying? Yeah, so first of all, as you say, the more traditional stats or quirky facts, they operate just like any other kind of journalist or any other media property. But then above and beyond that, what is much more valuable is using spokespeople. So it's a bit of a murky world and it's not true that you have to pay thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever to have your spokesperson on a podcast. If you've got someone either around your brand or around your campaign who is genuinely interesting, people want those on as guests. They want to hear from those people. It just takes time. It's like any PR campaign. You've just got to be very sort of thorough in how you're pitching that person. And this sounds like a big plug, but it's actually something very useful. We own a company called Podchaser. So Podchaser is essentially like the IMDb of podcasting. So you can go in there, anyone can go in there, and you can search by lots of different criteria. If you're looking particularly for PR agencies, they're a massive use case for Podchaser, because what they do is they use it to think about, right, spokesperson placement, trying to reach these kind of people, which podcast should I be considering, right down to like all the email addresses are there of the right people to, a bit like using any media database. Yeah, like the Rocks Hill of the podcast
the
world.
Roxhill / other media databases are available.
That's true.
Mock Crack. Does Call Connor still exist?
It does. Yeah, you have remembered well.
I've worked in PR agencies for a long time. But yeah, so spokespeople or brand ambassadors or people to do with the brand are a really good way to think about that editorially as well.
And what is the best way to pitch in that instance? Is it to go straight to the podcast? Is it to come to you?
Go straight to the podcast. We don't really get involved in that part unless it is sort of more of paid placement.
Understood.
But going straight to the podcast, whether that's the producer or whether if it's a smaller podcast, obviously the host direct. And as I say, all those details should be on Podchaser to be able to do that. And just because, these people they want content, they want interesting guests. So.
Yeah, it helps them, Yeah, I think that's so crucial for us to know. I'm sure many people in this room didn't realise there was such thing that existed. So that feels like an easy way we can start.
And I tell you why that's really good. And full disclosure, we were talking about this earlier. But the podcast charts, there's lots of different podcast charts out there, but they're not really representative of true listenership or they're not like foolproof ways of doing it. So it's a good indicator if you're looking, particularly for popular podcasts. But as I've said before, you don't want to just be looking at the biggest podcast. Yeah. You want to understand the full range of shows out there that are speaking to your audience. So.
I think that is a bit of a mistake. Like if we're suggesting podcasts to a client, we will just go on Spotify, look at the lists and think, oh, that looks good, I've heard of that. But actually that might not be the most tactical way. And, you know, using something like your database, I'm sure would really help. Bit of a gear shift. Get ready. Video. So obviously, not a huge gear shift, but obviously we've seen so many podcasts starting to expand in the video space. Like, firstly, why is that? And secondly, do you think that you spoke a bit at the beginning about actually that is another opportunity for brands to leverage? So how would you suggest going about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, as everyone knows, video has massively entered the podcast chat in the last few years. And that's what's driven that. That's driven a few things. Like we talked already about resonance and how into podcasts people get, and it's an extra dimension, right, to be able to also see your favourite hosts or see something that they're talking about. Social, obviously, video it's not just about making video episodes of a podcast. As we all know, clips, so when you scroll on TikTok or Instagram, whatever, clips are massive drivers of actually listenership. So I discover a lot of podcasts that I go on to listen to just through, my nightly scroll, because they're such a powerful driver as a promotional tool as well. But the other reason for the growth video, advertiser demand. I've already spoken probably about omni-channel campaigns. So you can make a campaign so much more effective and richer when you're tapping into all facets of a creator. So yes, start with the audio, and we will always be an audio company first at heart because that is what is so powerful. And actually, the data, I think, backs it up. But from our research, when we did the Podcast Pulse this year, yes, people are watching a lot more podcast video, but our research shows that audio is still the most sort of influential part of that mix, and it's not like the whole world has shifted to just watching podcast videos and said goodbye to audio. But yeah, it's powerful for advertisers too, to be able to sort of really extend that campaign across all the places that creators are and all the places those audience want to be with them. So it's interesting. It's an interesting philosophical and existential challenge for the podcast industry as well, but it is because without naming any names, I've listened to some new podcasts that have been launched, let's say in the last year, where they've been very video focused. And as an audio listener, because I listen when I'm running, when I'm cleaning, not very often, my partner does that, but when I can't watch. And I've listened to a few newer ones who have been clearly quite focused on video, and you feel left out as a listener because they start talking about something like a photograph or something funny in the room, and you're like, remember to explain it to your audio audience because those are the core and the heart of what you're doing. So it's an interesting challenge, I think.
And I think you were saying also that you don't want to cut people off from entering the podcast world if they feel like they need this huge production, video, cameras, it can stop people accessing the podcast.
That's a really good point from a creator point of view because, a lot of creators say to us, oh my gosh, do I need to have a full studio and do hair and makeup before, I do my podcast? And we don't want that to be the norm because we want everyone to be able to make a podcast. This isn't a plug, this is just to illustrate, but I have my own podcast. And I don't film it.
Say this to me. I did not know this.
Yeah, it's called Bit Fit, Bit Funny. I talk to comedians about running and stuff. New episode dropping on tomorrow. Anyway.
Oh, wow.
No, I'm trying to illustrate a point here. No, I don't film it because we're running or we're out walking when I record it, and I don't have the time, the resource, and I can't be bothered. But when it comes to promoting the episodes, I do sometimes feel a bit like, I'm a bit hamstrung. So I just get around it by making hilarious, stop motion animated videos on Canva, which don't take very long. So what I'm saying is, you can still be in the world of video to help grow your podcast or help attract advertisers. It doesn't have to be like a full set production. There's ways around it.
Okay, so you don't have to always be super polished. You can be more authentic, more sort of like social first, I guess, in your video approach.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's really good to know. And then moving on to current affairs and AI.
What's that?
Who knows? But
imagine?
Obviously it is the, subject of the moment. How is Acast approaching AI? What are your thoughts on it? Do you have a strategy? I think we've seen a rise over the past few months specifically of AI podcasts with AI hosts and, just good to hear from the source what your thoughts are there.
I mean, it's such a big topic. So I think there's two sides to it. The first side is what you talked about, content creation. And should we, one, be using AI to create podcasts? At Acast, we're quite clear. We do not believe in fully generating podcast content purely through AI, because for us, what makes them so resonant, there's the watchword, is that human, authentic connection, everything that makes it great, However, there are some applications where AI can be really helpful. So, for example, we've done it in the past where we've taken a series that's been really successful in English and used AI to then translate it into Spanish to open up to more audiences without actually changing any of the content. So that is purely about being able to extend the reach of a podcast and help it grow across language barriers. And also there are some applications like, like a daily news recap, which is quite functional. It might be really efficient to just be able to get that made using AI. But for us, we are very much in the area of advertisers love it, audiences love it because of the authenticity, and we don't want to compromise that.
Yeah.
The other side of the coin in terms of AI, though, where it can be incredibly practical, is in advertising solutions. Targeting, the smart recommendations tool that I talked about earlier, where we're really using like LLMs and like machine learning and like deep analysis to be able to observe better ads, target better, more context, and so on and so forth. I mean, I could talk for ages on that, but we don't have time. So it's not like AI bad when it comes to podcasting. There's so many practical applications. The other thing I would say, anything that takes labour time off of a creator, whether it's creating artwork, creating episode summaries, anything that helps them actually create and not do all the admin is a win in our eyes as well. So there's not a simple cut and dried answer to that.
Yeah, but I think it, like you said, like from an efficiency perspective, it could be really helpful, but you don't want to sort of compete with the reason why people go to podcasts in the first place, which is everything is, no one knows what's real or fake anymore, but listening to a true person speak honestly without being scripted, it is just rolling off the tongue. That's one of the reasons why people like them, and they have such great engagement, right? So you don't want to then make everything AI and you're sort of shooting yourself in the foot slightly. A question on representation. So obviously being audio-based and that being your heartland, you are really dealing in the sort of accent and dialect space. And for someone like me who has a bit of a Yorkshire twang, not so much anymore, but how I'd just be interested to know how you go about making sure you are representing a number of different voices and ensuring that it isn't just obviously like BBC and received pronunciation. I don't get the sense that that's the case in the podcast world, but like, is that a conscious effort? Like, what's your thoughts there?
Well, yes and no, but the beauty of podcasting is like there are very few gatekeepers. So anyone can make a podcast, anyone can publish a podcast, anyone can be available for monetization, and advertisers can find them, and we don't stand in the way and gatekeep, and that's kind of, that's kind of good in terms of just allowing anyone to have a voice.
Low barrier to entry.
And, we also actively work hard with our advertising clients to make sure that we are representing, and we're using, we do have some brands who come to us and don't have an ad already made, so we'll help them make an ad. And in terms of selecting the voice and the voiceover artist wants to work, make sure it's the best fit for the campaign rather than just something, homogenous that's not going to cut through and doesn't maybe resonate with the audience. So I would say that podcasting by its very democratic and open nature actually means that it is kind of beautiful in that way to be able to uncover stories or voices. The one thing I'd say is that, if you look at the top podcast charts, which aren't necessarily driven by hard data, but whatever, it's still overwhelmingly male. It still is. And that is something that we really want to try and overturn. That sounds like revolution, but you know what I mean? Like help change, because, women are listening to podcasts, believe it or not. Women are incredibly valuable. And so, the way that I see it, part of our job, this sounds a little bit like I'm trying to be all altruistic and aren't we wonderful, but the more money we can bring into the space, the more that we can champion those voices, the more we can drive revenue to those kind of voices to help them to carry on creating, the better. So.
Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting from a brand perspective as well, though, just making sure if we are going to make our own, it's got a female host to support that cause a bit.
Sure.
Last couple of questions now. This year, Acast turned 10 years old, so congratulations for that.
Thank you.
A big anniversary. What do you predict for the next 10 years in the world of podcasting, and how do you think things will change? Big question.
No, I think it will continue to grow. I really do. Like I said earlier, new audiences are coming to podcasting all the time. One thing I like to say is, I met some young people recently, and I was struck when I was talking to them because they're like, "Oh, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I work in podcasting," and they all said, "Oh, yeah, we watch loads of podcasts." And I was like, "Oh, that's a shift, not in a bad way, because I would never say, oh, I watch a podcast, but all these younger, oh my God, it makes me sound so old, but particularly through social, are discovering podcasts for themselves. And that's exciting because that brings in new eyeballs, new ears, new audiences, new advertisers. Same with different demographics, particularly older ones as well. So I think growth is just going to continue. I think video helps expand that pie as well. I think there are still so many brands who haven't yet woken up to the power of podcasts and podcast advertising and work with podcasters. So part of our job at Acast we see is not just, helping to grow Acast, but helping to grow the whole podcast industry so that people can just really realise the value of working in podcasts.
Yeah, things like this, helpful.
Exactly. So I think growth, and I think creators, like podcast creators, will continue to rise in terms of influence. We saw the effects on elections in the last few years, particularly in the US, even in the UK as well, that podcasters have on those. So I'm a Pollyanna, so I'm just saying the only way is up for podcasts. But if anyone wants to challenge me, I do love a debate as well.
We've got audience Q&A, so we'll save it for that. But cool. And then I think obviously we couldn't get this far without asking you what your personal favourite podcast is on the platform. If you can only pick one.
I always have the same answer, but it's true. Okay, my favourite podcast is called The Worst Idea of All Time. Has anyone ever heard of this podcast? Great. I am spreading the gospel. I feel like
the hosts are going to love you after this.
So it's two New Zealand comedians called Guy Montgomery and Tim Batt. And they watch, ostensibly what it started as was they watch the same movie every week for a year and then podcast about it. So they watch the most random films, like they've done Sex and the City. And they watch it every week and it just turns them crazy because they start noticing weirder things and it's a bit of a social experiment as well. But it's also just so funny and that classic podcast thing, it becomes less about what they're actually doing and more about their relationship and all that 100%. Kind of thing. And they're just top guys as well.
Like them as people.
Yeah, and it's they're currently doing Joker, Folie à Deux, they're doing an intense version of that, which is hilarious because I've not seen the film, so just listening to the podcast is just... So that's my favourite podcast, The Worst Idea of All Time. Amazing. It happens to be with Acast, but that's not why I chose it.
Amazing. And I think, obviously... Just first of all, or last of all even, just want to say thank you so much for this. Before we move on to some audience questions, I think it'd be super helpful if you could just list your sort of top 3 things for brands to remember about activating in the podcast space. What 3 takeaways would you give for everyone in this room?
Great, yeah. Think audience first rather than show. So we're really trying to move advertisers to think about what audience do I want to target and therefore which of the shows to be working with versus I just want to spend on that big podcast because, I've heard it's big.
Yeah.
Authenticity is key. What we've said is that what makes podcast advertising and particularly host-read sponsorships so powerful is giving the creators freedom to be themselves. So if you are going to start working in this area, don't be too, on message and asking for 5 million re-records because it's just not going to come out as authentic. And you're not going to get anywhere. And finally, my third piece of advice, spend loads in podcasting. Just spend loads. It's worth it.
Great closing thing. Sorry, I now have one extra question.
Oh, yeah.
In terms of return on investment, what metrics can you give to brands? Can you tell them, obviously it's a bit more abstract, isn't it, I suppose, to show the impact. But what sort of metrics would you give to a brand to be able to say to their stakeholders, right, this is what this drove?
We did actually do a study on this couple of years or last year, and I really hope I don't misquote this because this is the one stat I didn't prepare.
Okay, sorry, I'm getting you on the spot.
But the ROI versus other, it's something like 4 times or 4.5 times more the ROI that you get from podcasts.
I think I saw that.
Oh, yes.
You're right.
God, I'm going to be fact-checked off this. Versus other forms of media. Like, the other proof is that the number of returning advertisers that we have that come and return to spend with us because they've seen such results, like year on year or even week on week. That is proof, the fact that one thing that our CEO likes to say is the unique thing about podcasting is I could ask many of you here, name me a brand that spends a lot on podcasting. You could probably all tell me at least 1, if not like 5 brands. You can't really do that for many other media. You couldn't definitively say, I know that the biggest spender in TV is
really
this.
True, yeah.
Or I know the biggest spender on radio is this. Whereas podcasting, you could probably say, we know BetterHelp spends a lot.
Squarespace, big one.
I mean, yeah, exactly. So, and that's testament to how effective it is that even people... even regular Joes on the street could probably tell you who the top advertisers in that area are. So
amazing. Incredible. Thank you so much, Lizzy. We can give her a round of applause now.
Oh,
Let's
thank
go
you.
for it. Super exciting.